pretty sure when most people pick out an access point for their home network, all they can think about is bigger is better, right? Well, this guy's certainly got some big numbers behind it. BE12000 megabits per second aggregate throughput, 15,000 if you're in the US, by the way. 320 megahertz channel widths by 2x2 MIMO in the 6 gigahertz band. 160 or 240 megahertz channel widths, 4x4 MIMO in the 5 gigahertz band. 10 gigabit per second wired Ethernet uplink with PoE++. And of course, multi-link operation for Wi-Fi 7 clients. It's also got the Amada controller for locally hosted management of your whole fleet of Amada access points. Now, is this something most of you guys should be deploying in your home? This is way overkill for that. This is for people who need serious high bandwidth connectivity or to handle a very large number of clients. And realistically, that is probably not you at home. But I'm still going to take a look at it anyway, because bigger is always better, right? And while I'm at it, I'm going to try to get some packet captures of this new Wi-Fi 7 multi-link operation, and we'll see if we can see how it works in the real world. So if you're interested in, is MLO a scam? Is bigger better? Big caveman number, whatever? Then come along on this adventure. And disclosures. TP-Link Amada Networks, they sent me this unit for review, along with a 10 gigabit PoE switch to test it with, because otherwise I would have no way of powering it up and testing it. Now they won't see this review until you do. They also haven't paid me to make this review, and I've actually put out some of my own money for upgrading these guys here to support Wi-Fi 7 and 6 gigahertz and some of those features. I got new network cards for a number of my test clients, so we can do a hopefully realistic test of MLO here. Also, I got a merch store. If you're interested in helping support the channel, buying my merch on my website is a great way to do that. So, link down in the description below for my Ko-fi merch store. Okay, so what do I got in the box? Some manuals, who needs that? The unit itself is actually not as big as I thought it would be in my hands. It's like mounting bracket. This is probably mounting hardware as well. And it sure is. All kinds of mounting hardware for all different scenarios. So I don't know if you get a sense of scale for this. I thought it would be larger actually, but makes sense. Pretty chunky boy. So I flipped around. Probably had model information, serial number, that kind of stuff. And at the bottom, we've got 10 gigabit Ethernet PoE in and 12 volt DC, which is optional. We're going to be using 10 gig PoE today. This thing is a bit of a power monster, but yeah, let's get this guy set up. Another quick note, by the way, this guy is actually the EAP787. So all of Amada's access points are EAP, and then 7 for Wi-Fi 7 and 87 because it's one of the bigger ones. BE2000 is more of a specification. So BE is 802.11 BE, aka Wi-Fi 7, and 12,000 is the aggregate bandwidth across all bands. So that breaks down in the 2.4, 5, and 6 gigahertz bands. This is not the model number. This guy over here, that's the model number. Okay, so welcome to the test setup. Apologize if you hear a little bit of fan noise in the background. That PoE switch that's powering this guy is sitting behind me in there, and he's a little bit loud. So here's what I got today. So I got the EAP787, the Dreamliner. This mini PC here has Wi-Fi 6 and AX201. I thought it had an AX211, so sorry about that, but I booted it up and it's actually not 6 gigahertz. The laptop here also has Wi-Fi 6. I don't know what chipset it is, but it's an M1 MacBook Air. It's a couple years old. This guy here, I bought him an Intel BE200. So he's got MLO support, 6 gigahertz, pretty much all the features. He is running Kali Linux with the latest kernel, and we can do quite a bit of packet analysis on him. Both of these guys are running in monitor mode. Not exactly monitor mode, but I'm running them with a separate monitor tap, so I can see the raw frame data in Wireshark on my laptop here. My laptop can't do that, but I can still send packets from my laptop to simulate network load. So that's what I got going on here. You might notice that this is the only one that supports Wi-Fi 7, and that's because I looked through all of the devices I own, and not a single one supported Wi-Fi 7. So the Wi-Fi 7 standard officially released from the IEEE in September 2024. Now that's not even 2 years ago at this point, so it would make sense that devices from the last year or so would probably have Wi-Fi 7 support. But in reality, consumer manufacturers started selling like cheap consumer access points that claimed Wi-Fi 7 based on the draft spec like a year and a half before the spec even came out. It's like, how can you make something that's not even standardized yet? And in reality, I don't recommend anyone buy into a Wi-Fi standard before the spec is released and you're doing real hardware. So TP-Link, of course, did not release Omada hardware until after that. Same with Ubiquiti, by the way, which is why a lot of people say they were late to the game on Wi-Fi 7. In reality, they were following the standards and not jumping the gun. So bad job on the Wi-Fi Alliance for letting companies release like 2 years early, but it's what we got. Also, I like to point out this guy supports MLO. This is the Intel BE200, so it's going to be in a whole bunch of laptops that have BE support. But it only supports EMSLR, enhanced multi-link single radio. So when most people think of MLO, they're like, wow, my device can use 5 gigahertz and 6 gigahertz at the same time to send like, what would that be, 240 megahertz in the 5 gigahertz band plus 320 megahertz in the 6 gigahertz band, like 10 gigabits per second or something. And while the standard allows that to be implemented, no actual radios that I can find implemented. I mean, this one I think does on the access point side. It's not that uncommon on the access point side. But client radios that actually support simultaneous multi-band, like true multi-operation, are incredibly rare. I could not find any of them that were available in an M.2 card to put in a mini PC. So that's why I was going to buy the BE200 as a basic option and a flagship, but I can't find a flagship. I can find like 3 Android phones that claim to support 5 and 6 gigahertz simultaneous multi-link operation, and that's it. So they're using a custom chipset, I believe made by Qualcomm. There's only one family from Qualcomm that supports true multi-link operation. Most of what you're going to get with MLO in Wi-Fi 7 is for reliability, not for bandwidth. So it uses what's called enhanced multi-link single radio. So essentially this guy has 2 antennas, super common in the consumer space to have 2x2 MIMO support. And so with MLO, that essentially splits those 2 receivers. So one listens on 6 gig and one listens on 5 gig. And then they can transmit on one of those 2 frequencies in 2x2 configuration. So that means the access point can decide if it wants to send frames on 5 gigahertz or 6 gigahertz. And the client can also make that decision on a frame-by-frame basis or a stream-by-stream basis, but not at the same time. It cannot send and receive on both bands at the same time. It can just switch between them more quickly. So if you have a lot of interference on 5 gigahertz, it can jump up to 6 gigahertz for high bandwidth and then jump back down, in theory. Or if you have a lot of interference on one or the other, essentially it's moving around to avoid interference or load or things like that. So that's not going to get you 10 gigabits per second. It's going to get you a more reliable gigabit, which for most people is a fantastic thing, but it's very misunderstood, I think. So just to prove that, I'm going to set this guy up and we're going to see what frequencies it operates at. So here's the Wi-Fi 6 client. We can kind of see what's going on here. So every time frames come in, the channel frequency in this case is 5200, so that's going to be the Uni 1 band. That's the channel it's chosen. When frames go out, they're not tagged with a frequency yet because the Mac hasn't decided. But so we can see this particular client is using, well in this case it's using 802.11a for management frames, but it's doing it in the 5 gigahertz band. So switching over here, this is my Wi-Fi 7 client. So it's chosen 6295 megahertz. So let's see if I can follow this as a graph. So it looks like it's quite happy at 6 gigahertz. So this is going along at 6 gigahertz. Every time it does a channel scan, like in the background, we can see it scans some stuff at 2.4, it scans some stuff at 5.8, 5.2, and then back to 6.3 or wherever it's at now. So it's happy on this channel frequency, and if I can get it to change channels, I should see other frequencies pop up here. So for example, if I start up an iPerf test, what is that going to look like in my plot here? So I'm getting, wow, that is incredibly fast. I'm getting 2 gigabits per second over Wi-Fi, which is really good. So over here, I mean, this is by time and seconds, so you won't see a lot, but it looks like we're staying here at 6 gigahertz. Also, this is with 160 megahertz channel width. So the access point supports 320 megahertz channel width in the 6 gigahertz band. But again, no clients do. So the BE200, this is what most of your clients are going to have realistically. So 160 megahertz channels is what we get, 2x2 MIMO. That gets us, oh, looks like we dropped down now. We were doing pretty well. Do we switch channels? I don't think we switched channels. Oh, now we're back up, okay. Must have had some interference or something. That is, of course, the downside of Wi-Fi. Every time you have interference, you lose bandwidth. But generally, Wi-Fi is pretty good about retransmitting packets. Oh. Haha. I ran out of space for the capture. So we average 1.1 gigabits over Wi-Fi, which, with a peak of, what, like 2 gigabits? That's pretty good. So let's try that in reverse and see what we get. So again, we're getting 2 gig. Pretty happy about that. And that was pretty stable. What if we try byte here? Okay, so one side is really hurting the other side, so it looks like downlink is doing much better than uplink, but I'm still getting over 2 gigabits. So I'm pretty impressed by 2.2 gigabits or so over Wi-Fi, so good job. Okay, so this guy on 5 gigahertz, he's getting about 500 meg. Okay. And in reverse, he is getting a little bit better, about gigabit. I guess I'm getting about 1 gig on the 5 gigahertz band, then about 2 gig on the 6 gig. Can I do both at the same time? Okay, so we're getting about 1 gig symmetric, so 2 gig aggregate on 6 gigahertz. Looks like your 5 gigahertz is getting about 500, 600 meg aggregate, something like that. I guess I'm getting like 2.5 gig in aggregate between these two clients. And that's why so many home access points, by the way, have 2.5 gig instead of 10 gig uplinks. First of all, 2.5 gig is way more common in home environments. 10 gig is pretty common in enterprise, though. And because if real people buy this and connect their phone and do a speed test, and like, oh, I get 2 gigabits, great. That's the limit of what the phone can do. That's the limit of what 2.5 gig on the access point can do. No point in going higher. But this guy went the full mile, and he's got wired 10 gig. So in theory, I could push this higher if I had more clients. So it is a new day. I am here with my phone and my laptop to act as more clients, so I'll have 4 clients today. I also went in and tweaked a bunch of the wireless settings to sort of optimize a little bit more. I've been testing with the out-of-the-box default settings with the controller, and so I went in, I disabled some low rates, things like that, that'll hurt compatibility with like really old devices. But if you have devices that only support 802.11g, you should just replace them at this point. That standard came out in like 2004 and was deprecated in like 2012, I think, 2011. So it's had its run. So today we're going to try to get that guy to saturate 6 gig. These two guys here to saturate 5 gig together. That guy can do 160 megahertz. This guy can do 80. And then I'm going to have my phone on 2.4 gig, which is only on 20 megahertz. But we'll see if we can get like 5 gigabits or 4 gigabits out of the access point. I don't know if we'll be able to. One problem I've been having today that I wasn't having yesterday is this client seems to be stuck on 5 gigahertz. And I think that's related to scanning behavior. So in the 6 gigahertz band, there's no guarantee around the world that that band will even be available for use. And so if that band's not available for use, then the client can't send a probe to look for access points in the 6 gigahertz band. So what it does, it's a two-step process. First off, it looks at the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz to see what region it's in, to see if it's allowed to send probes in 6 gigahertz. In this case, the access point is saying it's from DE, German region. I couldn't find a way to change that, but it seems like all of the access points in Finland advertise as DE. So I'm guessing that's just a common location that's set across the EU region because all the limits are the same. So once it does that, it can probe in 6 gig. But since the space is so incredibly wide, it wouldn't want to probe on every 20 megahertz channel or even every 80 megahertz channel. So it just listens on every 4th channel and sees if there's an access point there. So that's an 80 megahertz spacing. So if the access point is on one of those channels, it'll find it. If it's not, it'll have to figure it out from a 5 gigahertz beacon. Also, it can look at the 5 gigahertz and 2.4 gig and see if they have a corresponding access point in the 6 gigahertz band. So it seems like that scanning takes longer. So if I boot this thing up and go straight into connecting to a network, it'll get stuck on 5 gig, which I believe is a behavior of just the network scanning on Linux. So now I think I'm in 6 gig, am I? So I'm pretty sure he's on 2.4 gig now, which is not what I wanted. Maybe some higher bandwidth will kick him up to better. Yeah, so we're definitely getting like 2.4 gig kind of speeds here. 400 meg, it's pretty high for 2.4 gig. There we go. Now we got some 6 gigahertz traffic. So it looks like I'm getting about 1.5 gig on the 6 gigahertz band here. This one's a bidirectional test, so we're getting about, I don't know, 1.25 gig aggregate on the 5 gigahertz band. Okay, data we got. So 6 gig host was receiving, so sending downlink only. It got 1.32 gig, so 5 gig host, 160 megahertz channels. This guy got 1.15 and 262. Laptop receiving only got 200 even. And my phone averaged 107. So that is an aggregate throughput of 3,098 megabits per second. So that is mostly downlink, a little bit of uplink through this guy. Wow, this guy is hot now. So the whole back is metal, and it's very warm to the touch. So yeah, be aware of that if you're going to be touching it all day, I guess. I mean, it's able to dissipate the heat clearly just sitting here. It's just warm. It's doing some work. So how about the controller? What's that like? So I don't think I mentioned yet, there's actually 4 different ways to configure and manage TP-Link's Omada access points. So if you just buy one of these and you just want to use it as a basic access point that's really, really fast, it has a built-in web UI. So if you're doing some sort of event stuff or you're just having one of them, I've seen plenty of people that just need one access point for stuff, you can just buy it and set it up. No controller necessary, nothing like that. So this is different from some other vendors where you must have a controller like, say, Ubiquiti. The other 3 options all run the same controller software. So you could either run the controller software in the cloud, which is free for small environments. That's what I used up here for the fraternity house, the Wayne Engineering Society, if you want to check out that video for a full Omada system. You can also buy a hardware controller. There's a couple hardware controller options, including some of their gateways that have controllers built in. And the option I'm using today is to run a locally hosted in my infrastructure. So I'm running it on Debian 12 in Proxmox VE in an LXC container. I stuck with Debian 12 instead of 13 because of the versions and the dependencies of Java being complicated. I'm a big Java hater, so I'm not a fan of it being developed in Java, but again, I'm not developing it, I'm just running it. And the other side effect of being developed in Java is this uses an outrageous amount of memory. So the controller is currently consuming about 2 to 3 gigabytes of memory. And if I leave it with 3 gig allowance, it'll eventually out of memory. Some of that's MongoDB, so the controller is based on MongoDB, and that's also very inefficient on memory. But it does work well, other than running out of memory. So here we can take a look at what we got. So I actually powered down the system overnight because the fan was so loud, so I powered it back up here. If I wasn't filming in this room, I probably would have left the fan on, but I mean, you can hear it now on camera, I'm sure. It's kind of irritating. Devices overview, pretty nice. So I don't have a gateway, and I don't have any OLTs, but that'd be nice to test. What I do have is switches and access points. They're both listed in good health, I guess. And if I want to, I can actually add IPv6 addresses, because most of these things support IPv6. Unify should take note of that one, by the way. So clicking on an access point, I can see some more detailed information about it. So what channel it's running, it's on channel 1, channel 40, and channel 69. What IP addresses it has, what build we're on. I'm on the latest build as of the filming of this video. And what the different radios are doing. Over the Clients tab, we can see everything going on the network. So I got these 4 devices connected. I can switch over and I can add my IPv6 address, and I can actually also add the upload traffic, which I think is going to be significant here. So it's caught all of the different IPv6s of these guys, no matter how many they have. The upload traffic was actually a whole lot because iPerf defaults to upload. So then running ByDeer, we get both of them. If we click on a specific client, we can pull up. So it's connected here with like a 4 gigabit link rate. That's the PHY rate, and then this is the actual data transfer here. So again, this is a pretty respectable management interface. It has all the features you'd expect of some sort of centrally managed Wi-Fi platform. It's not pushing me to get a gateway. I know some of the other systems are telling you you've always got to buy a gateway, etc. So I just have an access point and a switch, and it is working just fine and not complaining. So in addition to monitoring, we also have config, obviously. Most of what you'll probably look at is network config. So I can go in here to LAN or WLAN. So for wireless, I use WLAN a lot. So here's where I have my different SSIDs, where I have my MLO, and then I also created some other ones for testing. So it walks you through the settings pretty easily, so you can choose WPA Personal, Open, or Enterprise, and it restricts this based on using Wi-Fi 7, using MLO, etc. So since I'm using MLO, I must be using Wi-Fi 7, which means I must be using WPA 3, no other options. and I must be using protected management frames, but I could disable some of these if I was going down to just 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. I've also got the option to switch to a VLAN, so I could just type in a VLAN ID directly, or I could use a managed network here. So I created some managed networks, 20, 21, 22. So I could say I want this access point to be on this VLAN. This guy, by the way, supports up to 8 separate Wi-Fi SSIDs with different settings per radio. So 24 SSIDs is the number, but again, that's 8 per radio. So if you're doing 2.4 gig only or something, you might use up all 8 of those. Realistically, though, you want to keep this number down to as few as you absolutely can, because every new SSID adds beacon frames, which have to be transmitted at the basic rate, which is like 1.5 megabits per second, super slow. So you don't want to waste airtime on those. So just try to use one with good security, or if you must, one with good security, one with bad security, something like that. We also have settings on things like multicast to unicast, multicast filtering. If we want to filter out MDNS or things like that, we can choose which MAC addresses are allowed to send those, etc. Another feature people seem to go absolutely wild over is PPSK, either with or without radius. I think I made a video up here on private pre-shared keys with radius. Now that can be a great security feature for some networks. However, WPA3 makes it much harder. So on Omada, you can only do this on WPA2 networks, which means you can't do it on networks which support 6 gigahertz. So here I say PPSK without radius. I already created a profile that has different passwords. I can enable that on 2.4 and 5, but as soon as I click 6, it resets that to WPA personal. My only options are personal or enterprise. So the way private pre-shared keys usually work, there's 2 ways. One way, without radius, is we have a list of all of the possible pre-shared keys, and we've pre-hashed them all. So the access point has a list of all the password hashes in memory. Every time a client tries to connect, it tries to decrypt that frame using all of the possible passwords. Now that means the access point now has to do a lot more crypto work, because it has to do that for each of your passwords. But if you only have a couple of passwords, that's not terrible. You can easily bin clients into a different VLAN depending on what password they typed in. However, that requires that we can try that decryption process over and over again for each password. And in WPA3, the handshake was made more secure. So back in WPA2, I made a video about password cracking here. It was very vulnerable to offline password cracking. So someone could drive by your house outside, capture the beacons that are sent out by your Wi-Fi network, and if they just waited about 5 minutes, they would get enough information to take that data back home and crack it on a server with a bunch of graphics cards. And so that means the attack isn't exactly cheap. You still have to have a bunch of graphics cards, but you don't have to do it where the attack is happening. You can do it offline somewhere else. You can rent GPUs across the world, whatever you want. So WPA3, both sides, the access point and the client, have to do a lot of crypto work in each step. And that means we can't just try it again and again and again, because we have to send seeds, they have to send responses, and all of this will change with a different password. So with WPA3 SAE, that now leaves us with, we must know the password before we start the key exchange process. In theory, we could do that with radius, but Omada doesn't support that. So realistically, going forward, PPSK is dead. We should be using WPA Enterprise instead. Have I made a video about WPA Enterprise? I don't know if I made a video on WPA Enterprise specifically. I know I made the one with small step. Anyway, you're using a username and password to log in or a certificate. So that is the high security approach to WPA security going forward. And of course TP-Link supports that, so I can set WPA Enterprise on 6 gigahertz. I can set radius profiles here. There's a built-in radius server where I can manage users and stuff. So I could create new users based on their username and password or their MAC address and what VLAN ID they get. Also have the option of creating my own radius profile, which unfortunately doesn't support IPv6 here, but it does support a URL. I'm not sure if it'll resolve an IPv6 there, but lets me type it in. And it supports RADSEC, so if we add certificates, we can do our RADSEC, which is nice. Now there's a lot of other configuration that shows up here in the controller, but these are all features pretty much that require a gateway or more hardware than I have. So I don't have a gateway that can do VPN or most of these things. So I'm not really testing those features of Omada. Pretty much just testing access point style stuff today. So I've been showing you the self-hosted controller's web UI this whole time, but they also have an app, and the app can communicate with Bluetooth to the access points for provisioning. Now I didn't have to go through that for my setup because I just plugged them in over Ethernet and they all discovered each other, but that is a possibility. So let's take a look at what the app's got going for it. So here in the app, I got pretty much everything I have on the web UI. So you can see I've got one AP, one switch. So I've got a sort of topology here. So clients off of the switch, clients off the AP, and the controller. I also have access to all of the same data I have, including my device list, device configuration, and even all of the wireless settings. So I can come in here and change Wi-Fi networks from the app if I want to. So I found this really handy when I was setting up the full Omada network on the Fraternity House video, which I think I've already linked. And so I use the app with the cloud controller then to pair all of these guys, so I didn't have to bring my laptop around the house. I could be up on a ladder, install an access point, log it in, see if it provisioned, etc. before I leave, all from the app on my phone. And this works just as well with a locally hosted, self-hosted controller like I'm running here. And of course, the self-hosted controller supports multiple sites as well, even though I just have one today. One last trick I got for you guys down here is in Bluetooth. So these guys can do Bluetooth too. So most of the Wi-Fi 7, and I think some of the Wi-Fi 6 access points as well, support Bluetooth. And I think this was originally done for provisioning, so your phone app could help set up the access point over Bluetooth. But it can also now act as a Bluetooth IoT gateway for like IoT gadgets that use the iBeacon Bluetooth Low Energy profile. And so the way that works is we come in here, we enable Bluetooth, and then under IoT transport streams, we can set up a remote server to send all of the BLE data. So I set this up here over HTTP. I've got it set up on just a simple Python app I wrote. And so it's going to send iBeacon, Eddystone, or MindW type devices. Unclassified didn't seem to work for me for some reason, but maybe that's a firmware update. And so it's basically going to send all the BLE data it gets that fits these categories to this HTTP endpoint. And so here's what one of those looks like. So I've got the reporter, so it's what access point is sending the data, and then just an array of all the beacons it saw, including their unique ID, UID. So this is an iBeacon in this case. It has that data. So if you have any other iBeacon type sensors, I know they're really popular now with like physical location tracking, and so having a whole fleet of these access points around your facility, you can track where things are if they're advertising their BLE location periodically. So BLE devices will basically just broadcast, basically just their ID periodically. And so by tracking which access points can see that reception and the signal strength, you can triangulate where these trackers probably are. And so by using the Omada access points, that means you don't need another set of hardware for that if that's some feature you're looking to get into. Now it seems like this is a pretty new feature and not fully developed yet, but it's another interesting side note I thought you guys might care about. So I guess that leaves me with, what do I think of the Omada EAP787? What do I think of Omada Wi-Fi? And I guess Omada generally. So at this point I've looked at, I think, the three major players in this sort of SMB space, so small business. So TP-Link Omada, Unify, Ubiquiti, and Grandstream. So all of them have claims of grandeur, I guess, but mostly these are going to be deployed by small businesses for managed service providers or things like that. So when you get into the real enterprise stuff, you're probably going to be running something like maybe Juniper Mist, something real high-end like that. And all three of those companies have had quirks. I've had gripes with all of them, including this one, but I think this one's been pretty competent today. So one of the only problems I noticed was that I can't put in an IPv6 address for the Radius server. So I tested it with IPv6 only networks, I tested it with multiple VLANs, all of the corner cases that have gotten caught up on past access points I've used, past access points I've reviewed, long-term issues people have found, stuff like that. And I didn't have any of those in the week or so I've been running this as my main access point for my phone and my laptop. So that's good, I guess. So in the past, I've had issues with some access points and how they handle IPv6 multicast, including some units I bought from TP-Link maybe 10 years ago or so. So glad to see they fixed that issue, I guess. But basically multicast leaking between VLANs. Not had that issue here at all. Other issues I've seen other access points have. One of the Grandstream access points I reviewed had a bug where IPv6 packets weren't forwarding with the correct VLAN tag. And they fixed the bug, and they sent me an updated firmware, which I thought was nice, but then they didn't push that firmware to the public for over a year. So other people were coming to me asking me, why does this Grandstream thing that worked for you not work for me? And I was like, well, didn't they release the firmware update? But they didn't release it. So anyway, that worked fine on TP-Link. All the forwarding packets had the correct VLAN tags, that kind of stuff. So that wasn't overlooked. I also used IGMP snooping on the switch and on the access point, and that worked fine for both V4 IGMP and V6 MLD. And they also had pretty robust multicast filtering, both for IPv6 and IPv4. So as for forwarding packets across the Wi-Fi network, this seemed to do a great job. So again, I'm not reviewing the Omada gateways and routers today, just their Wi-Fi. But as the Wi-Fi goes, the only places where we would really see IPv6 lacking would be in the management plane side. So the data plane side seemed to be perfect. It'll handle your IPv6 networks and your IPv4 ones just fine. On the management plane side, it does get an IPv6 address for the unit itself and an IPv4. And that worked, but the controller didn't seem to like to use that IPv6 address. So I didn't force it into an IPv6 only scenario because the switch wouldn't have liked that. But just something to be aware, you might need IPv4 on your management plane network. And of course, it doesn't allow IPv6 addresses for the Radius server. So you have to type in an actual IP address there, which is surprisingly common that IP addresses have to go into Radius servers instead of DNS addresses. I don't know why that's a Radius thing. Radius is kind of a weird old protocol, but it does support RADSEC, which is good, which last time I checked, Unify did not. But Unify may have updated since then. But it still supports IPv4 only for Radius. And also for GRE, by the way. So this is a feature I haven't seen on any lower-end access points. I believe it's common on higher-end access points. But basically, instead of using VLANs on the wire, you can tell the access point to tunnel all of the user traffic over GRE. So generic routing encapsulation that encapsulates Ethernet frames inside of an IP frame. And so that's used to transit layer 2 segments across layer 3. And this supports GRE. You can create one GRE tunnel with up to 2 redundant gateways. And then for each Wi-Fi, you can specify if it connects directly to a VLAN on the wire or if it connects to the GRE tunnel. So we're not creating multiple GRE tunnels, but if you're in a real enterprise scenario where we want to trunk all of your traffic back to a firewall, and the firewall is doing GRE, which apparently is a common architecture in large networks, this can do that too, but only over IPv4. So, out of those 3 major players I mentioned, this is definitely the Wi-Fi that I would choose. In fact, it's the Wi-Fi I chose back in, I think, 2012 for my own house. So at that point, I was in college and I needed Wi-Fi, and I got EAP115s. That was before they were called Omada, but they had a central controller back then just for Wi-Fi, and it worked pretty well. Those were 2.4 gig only. I probably still have them in a basement somewhere. I ran them for maybe 8 years until I retired them and replaced them with Wi-Fi 5 gear. Also from Omada, also with the central controller, and that's still running. I haven't updated the setup in like 6 years. Maybe I should do a Wi-Fi 7 upgrade there next time I go back to the US, but they've been running fine. So I haven't had any major issues with them. If I were to be deploying these to clients, I would be perfectly comfortable deploying Omada. I'm sure plenty of people are going to be asking in the comments about the new US ban on routers. I don't know if this counts as a router. It actually does not do routing. There is no way to make it do routing. It is only an access point, but apparently just about anything that processes data could be counted as a router by the US government. So maybe it's banned, maybe it's not. I don't know. TP-Link, this particular one is the EU model. So it is, I think, listed as, oh no, it's listed as California, okay. So TP-Link Systems Inc. is a US company based in California. The hardware is manufactured, this particular one's manufactured in China. This one was distributed to me by TP-Link in the Netherlands, who distributes their EU products, I guess. That's also why this is only a BE12000 instead of a 15000, because this model in the US can do 160 plus 80 on the 5 gigahertz band, and there just isn't enough spectrum to do that here in the EU. But anyway, TP-Link seems to know what they're doing. Omada's been around now for 3 Wi-Fi generations. I think Wi-Fi 5 is when they started using that branding. So that's about 10 years of Wi-Fi equipment for the Omada branding. By now it's grown from a simple managed Wi-Fi setup where you had a single pane of glass for your access points to a full integrated controller setup where you can run access points, routers, switches, all that kind of stuff. I, of course, just have access points today, but if you want to go all in an Omada, that's an option. I will have a link down below where you can buy this product or other Omada products, I guess, from the Omada store. If you have any questions about it, feel free to message me in the comments down below. I'm going to keep this guy here. I'm probably not going to keep it as my access point just yet because I'm still trying to work out the mono gateway. I did a live stream on the mono gateway. It's Tomash. You've probably heard of him. He's been building a gateway from scratch for a couple years now. And so I have his gateway, and I'm going to set that up as my router here eventually when I get around to figuring out the cable modem shenanigans and stuff like that. But this may be my access point. Maybe I'll get a smaller one, actually, because ironically this one is quite large for me. I have like an 80 square meter house, so I definitely don't need this much Wi-Fi, especially because none of my clients support 6 gigahertz anyway. So I could go with something lower power and a quieter switch with less fan noise would be nice. But then again, this is drawing 30 watts, so it needs that PoE++ for that headroom. So it makes sense. So that's what I think of the Omada. Hopefully this wasn't too rambly of a video, but link down to Omada down below. If you want to chat with me, Discord server, link down below for that as well. If you want to follow me on Mastodon, it's kind of like the Deadbird site, you know, down in the description for that. If you want to buy my shirts, that's a great way to support my channel. Link in the description again for that one on my Ko-fi. And as always, I'll see you guys on the next adventure.